Welcome to Philosophy 2200, Ancient Philosophy. Today, we will be looking at a portion of Book 1 of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. Let's see how much ground we can cover. We have 2 sessions to do this. I will certainly not try to get us all the way through Book 1 today. We'll see what we can do. Okay, Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. Let's begin at the beginning, I suppose. Yes, if we look at 1094a, 19 to 26, here we go. Chapter 2, the beginning of Chapter 2 on page 1 of our version for this class, the Joe Sachs translation. If you're working with a different edition, well, again, the Becker pagination is 1094a, 19 to 26, although one thing to note with Aristotle, translations can be quite different. So, if you're working with another version and it doesn't sound much like this, well, stop by my office hours, send me an email if it's confusing. Because again, I can look at Aristotle's Greek here and I can figure out what's going on, and many of these translation differences can be resolved or explained on my part. I'm certainly willing to help you if you're working with an edition of Aristotle that's substantially different. If you are, that's on you. Again, I encourage everybody to use this version, the best translation in English of Aristotle. There's a reason I chose it. However, if you tried to save some money and now you're looking at Aristotle online, well, now you know the English translations can be quite different. It's not always easy to make sense of Aristotle's Greek. So here we are, Chapter 2, though. If there is some end of the things we do that we want on account of itself, that is, if we ever do anything in our lives and we actually want to do the thing we're doing just for its own sake, and let's hope that's true, and if, Aristotle goes on, the rest of the things we do on account of this thing, the thing we actually want to do for its own sake, and we do not choose everything on account of something else. If we did that, Aristotle says, the choices would sort of multiply to infinity, and desire would be empty and pointless. He's saying, imagine if everything we did was for the sake of something else. I'm in your class, Professor Turner, for the sake of a grade. I'm at the university for the sake of a degree. I'm pursuing that degree for the sake of a job. I'm pursuing that job for the sake of a paycheck. Pursuing that paycheck for the sake of a home and a car and some disposable income. And I'm pursuing those things for other reasons. And what he's saying is, if everything you do is being done for the sake of something else, well, at the end of the day, nothing you do is really for the sake of anything. There needs to be something that you want on account of itself that will then orient everything else you're doing. So you'd say something like, yes, I'm in your class for the sake of a passing grade. I'm in the university, at the university for the sake of a degree. I'm pursuing that degree for the sake of a job. I'm pursuing that job for the sake of a paycheck. Good God, let's hope there's more than that. For the sake of doing meaningful work that makes the world a better place, and for the sake of a paycheck. And I'm pursuing that paycheck for the sake of a certain number of things that I consider to be good, such as a home, a vehicle, disposable income, etc. And I'm pursuing those things for the sake of doing fun things with my family. And then you get to that, doing fun things with your family, whatever, your parents, if you're still young, your children, if you're a bit older, your spouse, or whatever. Why are you doing that? Aristotle wants us to think. And that's where you start to get to the point. That's what you're doing for its own sake, right? You're not having a good time with your family and friends, let's say, for the sake of what, right? For the sake of just sort of recreating, so that when you go back to work on Monday morning, you'll do your job even better. Let's hope not. Right? You get to something And when somebody were, if somebody like Aristotle were to ask you, why are you doing that thing, right? Why are you, playing in the pool with your kids? And the idea is, this is what it's all about for me, right? This is why I do everything I do, so I can have fun with my family members and do something that is fun and enjoyable, right? And then that would be the thing you're doing on account of itself. And everything else, you might say, that you do is to get to that point, right? To be able to afford that swimming pool, to be able to have that swimming pool installed and maintained, to be able to have a home with a yard that has a pool, right? All the work you put in, all the things you do for the sake of other things, all the classes you took at school, the degree you earned, the job interview that you did well on, the job you got, right? The work you put in every week, all for the sake of something that you enjoy doing just for its own sake. Okay, good. Now, let's move on then. So, this thing then that you're aiming at for its own sake, whatever it is, would be the good, Aristotle says, and in fact the highest good. Here's this question then. This is going to be the topic for the rest of the book, really. Would not an awareness of it have great weight in one's life? Wouldn't it be good to know what this thing is that we're aiming at? This activity worthwhile in itself and for its own sake? Would not an awareness of it have great weight in one's life, so that, like archers who have a target, we would be more apt to hit on what is needed? He's comparing, so this highest good is ultimately going to be what they call eudaimonia here, Aristotle and other Greeks, and it was roughly translated as happiness. And Aristotle's here using a very important metaphor for him, the metaphor of a target, an archery target. He's conceiving of happiness as a goal we're aiming at. And wouldn't it be good, he says, if we knew what it was, the target we're aiming at, we might actually be able to hit it. It's going to turn out, if you follow this metaphor further in Aristotle's thought here in Nicomachean Ethics, well, it's not just any target we're aiming at, happiness. It's not a stationary target, right? So it's complicated. The target moves. And because the target moves, makes it even more important for us to know what it is we're aiming at. It's a moving target. Okay, let's keep going. Now, what is called ethics here is really just the study of this ultimate good, happiness, and how to accomplish it as a human being. Okay, let's keep going. Let's have a look at 1095A 14 to 28. All right, this is chapter 4, I suppose. Yes. Chapter 4, 1095, A14 through A28. This is on page 3 of the Joe Sachs translation. So here we go. Taking up the thread again, the thread of happiness, what it is, how to accomplish it. Since every kind of knowing and every choice reach towards some good, this is essentially, Aristotle begins from just asking himself a simple question, right? People are doing stuff. They're engaged in activities. What are they doing? What are they aiming at? His answer is they're ultimately aiming at their own happiness. And they do this by reaching towards various things that they consider to be good, such as a passing grade in the class, such as a university degree, such as a job that provides a stable income, and then the things you can buy with that income, and then the things you can do when all your material needs are met and you have free time on your hands, that you get to choose what you want to do with that time with the people that mean something to you, or something like this, right? Okay. Since every kind of knowing and every choice reach towards some good, let us say what it is we claim politics aims at. Why is politics entering the picture here? Well, turns out ethics and politics are connected. This is something like the ethics here, right, obviously. The sequel in Aristotle's corpus is his politics. So this book, honestly, leads right into Aristotle's politics. You can move right from chapter 10, or book 10, I should say, of the Nicomachean Ethics into book 1 of Aristotle's politics. Okay, where are we? Yes. What does politics aim at? Let us say what it is we claim politics aims at, and what of all the goods aimed at by action is the highest in names is pretty much agreed about by the majority of people. And he thinks when you have a lot of people agreeing about something, that doesn't mean it's true, but it does mean you should maybe start there in thinking about this thing, because it is unlikely that a majority of people are completely wrong about something. That's his view, anyways. And there's a reason, I suppose, for it, but of course we know historically that a majority of people can be wrong, quite wrong. And so the mere fact that a majority of people think something doesn't actually give us, I think, a reason to assume that it's plausible or that there's something even worth preserving in that majority opinion. Sadly, history has shown us, right, that to put it mildly, a million Elvis fans can be wrong, right? Maybe Elvis isn't all he was cracked up to be. All right, in name, this thing that everybody is aiming at, the highest good, it's agreed upon by the majority of people. Most people, he says, hoi polloi in Greek, as well as those who are more refined, professors like me, I suppose, or their equivalents in antiquity, the learned, the wise, say it is happiness, and assume that living well and doing well are the same thing as being happy. But about happiness, what it is, they dispute, and most people do not give the same account of it as the wise. Some people take it to be something visible and obvious, such as pleasure, or wealth, or honor. And different ones say different things, and even the same person often says different things. When sick, one thinks it is health. When poor, that it is wealth. And when they are conscious of ignorance in themselves, people marvel at those who say it is something grand and above them. That's a little dig at Plato there. And some people believe that besides these many good things, there is some other good by itself. Oh, here we go. Another dig at Plato, perhaps. Which is also responsible for the being good of all these other things. The good as a sort of form above the forms, the ultimate kind of big form from which all the other forms come, right? The good, which is the source of all good, right? We read Plato's allegory of the cave. This would be the sun outside of the cave. Okay, to review all these opinions is perhaps rather pointless, Aristotle says. It would be sufficient to review the ones that come most to prominence or seem to have some account to give, right? This isn't an opinion poll, Aristotle's saying. Let's look at the actual positions here that are worth considering. Let it not escape our notice, he goes on, that arguments from first principles differ from those that go up toward first principles. Oh boy. And the point here is we're not going to proceed from first principles to knowledge derived from those principles. Instead, we are going to go up toward first principles in this book. Why? Because we can take it for granted. Aristotle believes that human beings are trying to accomplish their happiness. We don't need to justify that assumption. He says, just look around. People are doing stuff. Ask them why they're doing what they're doing. Keep asking them why. Like a 5-year-old kid, keep asking them why. And eventually they're going to not be able to give you an answer, or rather I should say, the answer that they'll eventually arrive at will be the conception of happiness they are pursuing. Right? They won't be able to give you an answer that I'm just doing this for the sake of something else. Eventually, I mean, that's how it'll start, but the idea is eventually, right, the answer they give will be, well, I'm doing this because this is just what I live to do, and everything else that I do really is so that I can do this thing. This thing, then, the doing of it will be that person's happiness. Okay. One must begin, he says, at 1095b, this is around 2, one must begin from what is known here, right? We know that people are trying to achieve happiness. But this has two meanings, the things known to us and the things that are known simply. Perhaps then we, at any rate, ought to begin from the things that are known to us. We don't have access to the things that are known simply about human happiness. Okay? Those are the first principles, essentially. Huh? What we do have, though, when it comes to happiness, are the things that are known to us. In other words, we have a lot of different views about happiness and why people pursue happiness and what they take happiness to be. Aristotle goes on, this is why the one who is going to listen adequately to discourse about things that are beautiful and just, and generally about things that pertain to political matters, needs to have been beautifully brought up by means of habits. For the primary thing is that something is so. Right? People want to be happy, and they are trying to be happy. And if this is sufficiently evident, as it should be, there is no additional need for the reason why. Okay, I think enough said here. What he's getting at is you won't need to have all the assumptions spelled out. You won't need to have somebody explain to you why people pursue happiness if you have been beautifully brought up by means of habits. In other words, if you have been brought up well and have some education. Okay, the primary thing is that something is so. And if we recognize that something is so, there is no additional need for the reason why. Right? So don't ask why people pursue happiness. You need to ask that. Aristotle's response is you have not been beautifully brought up by means of habits. In other words, leave his classroom and never return. All right. What, Aristotle's not a professor these days, huh? It's a rather harsh attitude. Let's keep going, okay? Because this is not the most important thing. It's an interesting account of Aristotle's methodology here, but I don't think we need to pursue it further. Let's look at chapter 5, because again, he's going to come back. He keeps digressing and coming back to the main point. For our part, he says at the beginning of chapter 5, this is 1095b, I don't know, about 15. For our part, let us speak from the point where we digressed. Most people, and the crudest people, seem not without reason. Interesting, right? On the one hand, he's denigrating such folks. On the other hand, he's admitting they have a point or there's a grain of truth in their position. Most people and the crudest people seem to assume from people's lives that pleasure is the good and is happiness. So there's the most popular view. What is happiness? Pleasure. For this reason, they are content with a life devoted to enjoyment. For there are three ways of life, especially, that hold prominence. The one just now mentioned, a life of pleasure, and the political life, and third, the contemplative life, and it turns out maybe there's a fourth too. Now, most people, Aristotle claims, show themselves to be completely slavish by choosing a life that belongs to fatted cattle. That is, the life of pleasure. And it sounds like he's just denigrating people that pursue pleasure here, but he's actually making a point. This comes out of his, psychology, frankly. That is, his study of the souls of animate beings, and he distinguishes humans from animals along this line, basically, right? Animals have sense organs like we do, right? Eyes, ears, noses, mouths, and whatnot, and sensuous pleasure then for an animal is its, the enjoyment of sensual pleasure in eating, drinking, and procreating. These are the activities that correspond to happiness, if there was such a thing as happiness, for an animal. And since we are rational animals for Aristotle, there's a sense in which these sensuous pleasures are proper to our nature, but only to our animal nature, not so much the rational side of the equation. So I think that's his problem here with the life of pleasure as a suitable candidate for genuine happiness. His claim here is if that's our conception of happiness, then we have an animal conception of happiness. And, not without reason, because there's a sense in which, we are animals. However, we are more than just, animals with sense organs. We have brains. For Aristotle, we have logos, which is the power of articulate language and reason. And this is not something that other animals have, or at least very few, if any. Okay, well, that's one, right? One life, one approach to happiness. Live for today, enjoy the moment, and make it about sensual pleasure. Okay. Most people show themselves to be completely slavish by choosing a life that belongs to fatted cattle, but they happen to get listened to because most people who have power share the feeling of Sardanapalus. Or Donald Trump, frankly, right? Or the powerful, or Jeffrey Epstein, or the powerful of any era, for, where the conception of having power is that everybody pursues power just to maximize their own private pleasure. And anybody who's not doing that is a fool. So that's a very popular view. And we have role models, powerful tyrants and powerful political figures and celebrities, even in the ancient world and all the way to today. And a lot of people share this conception of happiness, right? To maximize private, sensuous pleasure. Everything else is in service to that. Refined and active people, however, Aristotle says, choose honor. But this is pretty much the goal of political life. So here's one conception, right, of happiness. Not the pursuit of pleasure, but of honor. I want to receive honors. I want to be recognized for excellence. I want awards. That's what I live for, right? So if you ask a football player, right, like thinking of these really old quarterbacks, Tom Brady and Drew Brees, they're clearly not playing for money any longer. They've accomplished plenty of things. They'll both be going to the Hall of Fame, etc., right? But why are they continuing to play, right? The honors, right? One more MVP award, one more Super Bowl ring. That's what it's all about. Not the money, right? Not the pleasure of being wealthy, but the honors that you earn in a kind of competition with others to be excellent. This pursuit of honor, though, Aristotle says, appears to be too superficial to what is sought, for it seems to be in the ones who give honor, rather than in the one who is honored. But we divine that the good is something of one's own and hard to take away. So if the pursuit of honor can't be what even the people who claim to pursue honor think it is. That is, happiness, right? My happiness is in the pursuit of honor, and it's because, in a nutshell, an assumption that Aristotle doesn't think he needs to justify, and again, you would say, if you want to know why this is, you need to go back to the drawing board, as he would put it, but an assumption he's making here is that happiness is something, the accomplishment of happiness is something that lies in the power of the person trying to be happy. And if you're pursuing honor, that's something that other people give to you. So in other words, the source of your happiness comes from the judges, you might say. And as any athlete knows, the judges don't always get it right. Okay, Jose Luis Castillo beat Floyd Mayweather in their first fight, but did not get the decision. Okay, so if honor is your motivation, well, the judges sometimes get things wrong, and that means you're going to be worthy of honor. You'll be like Castillo, who should have won the fight, but didn't get the win, right? Because the judges got it wrong. Now Mayweather won the rematch, so. But that doesn't, nonetheless, right? Things like that happen. And that's the problem with the pursuit of honor, in a nutshell. For Aristotle is, you better hope the judges get it right. They don't always do so. Okay, now, but he's going to deepen his analysis of honor here and say, look, it's, the people that are pursuing this, though, they're on to something, right? People seem to pursue honor in order to be convinced that they themselves are good. At any rate, they seek to be honored by the wise and by those who know them, and for virtue. It is clear then that at least according to these people, virtue is something greater. And one might perhaps assume that this, rather than honor, is the end of political life, and I think that's his claim, right? Is that ultimately people who pursue honor are really pursuing excellence, and they want to be recognized for excellence. And so, in other words, there's a candidate for happiness, virtue, which in Greek arete can also be translated as excellence or proficiency in something, being really good at something. Okay, even this too seems incomplete, Aristotle says, though, since it seems possible while having virtue even to be asleep or to be inactive throughout life. I mean, you can be like Antonio Brown, maybe the best wide receiver in football, but inactive for a year or more. Why? Because of turmoil off the field, etc. In other words, what if you are really good at something, but for various reasons, in the case of Brown, getting yourself into trouble, but in the case of others, right, suffering an accident or falling into a coma or whatever the case might be, or being prevented, for various reasons from being able to do what you are in fact good at, not getting the job, being passed over so the boss could hire their child or something over you. You know how to do it, but you're not going to, be rewarded. So in other words, the mere possession of virtue, being able to do something well, Aristotle's going to say, can't be a legitimate conception of happiness, because it's possible to be able to do something well and yet for various reasons to never actually accomplish it. And often, in some cases, through absolutely no fault of your own. In other words, you were good at what you do, and it wasn't recognized, and you did not get the opportunity to realize it in real life, and instead it just remained a kind of dormant potential that you always had. Okay. No one, Aristotle says, would consider one who lived in that way, someone who had this power of excellence, this virtue, but either was asleep or inactive throughout life, or maybe even worse, right, suffered evils and the greatest misfortunes. Right? In other words, how about someone who is fantastic at something, but then bad stuff happens to them? No one would consider a person who lived in that way to be happy, except when defending a hypothesis. Again, a dig at Aristotle, a dig at Plato, dig at Socrates. Again, Socrates, right? Who apparently is happy even when he's condemned to death, is happy even when he's about to drink the poison, right? And Aristotle says that's crazy talk, okay? That's just not right, Aristotle wants to say, right? There's something wretched about what happens to Socrates, something terrible, and no amount of sort of serenity can change that. All right, this is enough, Aristotle says, about these things, since they are spoken of sufficiently in the current popular writings. And we have no note there either. This is kind of funny and kind of sad at the same time. Aristotle had a lot of exoteric writings that were available in his time. These notes actually were not meant for public consumption. We were teaching Aristotle the way he hoped to be taught. We'd be teaching his popular writings in a class like this. Sadly, those writings are lost. At least almost entirely lost. Not entirely, right? The Protrepticus, and there are fragments. But, these writings he's referring us to, we don't really have them as we would like to have them. The Protrepticus, though, would be one place to look, right, where you do have this problem being considered. Also, it's going to resurface in chapter 10 of book 1, so we'll come back to it then. The third way of life is the contemplative way of life, about which we shall make an investigation what follows. Thanks, Aristotle. That's also going to be him postponing his discussion of the contemplative life to book 10. So we're going to look at chapter 10 of book 1 for a consideration of the relationship of happiness and suffering of evil and misfortune. And then in book 10, we may not get there at all, but if you ever were to get there, that's where he comes to analyze the contemplative life. and spoiler alert, right, that's going to be the best way to accomplish happiness, at least in this book, The Ethics. He's going to come back to the political life again, the politics, and it's going to turn out that it's one of those kind of multiple choice answers, right? Both of the above. It's going to be both contemplation and political activity, in a sense, that are both candidates for genuine happiness for Aristotle. Okay, the life of money making. Now here's a fourth choice, all of a sudden, a fourth option. Thought we had three, Aristotle. We're already on to four here. The life of money making is a type of compulsory activity. So the idea is, here's another popular conception, apparently, of happiness. Get rich, make a lot of money. The life of money making is a type of compulsory activity. In other words, people who are, pursuing wealth have to behave in compulsive manners. They have to get up early in the morning. They have to constantly balance the books. They have to constantly be looking for new opportunities, etc. Life of money making is a type of compulsory activity, and it is clear that wealth is not the good being sought, since it is instrumental and for the sake of something else. So he can rule out this idea of happiness as wrong right from the beginning. And the idea is happiness is wealth, and by pursuing wealth we become happy. The reason we can rule this out from the beginning, Aristotle says, is because wealth is a sort of paradigmatic case of something that is only good for the sake of something else, because wealth itself has no value, or at least very limited value, outside of the things that you use it to purchase or something like this. The goods and services are the things you actually want, and wealth is just a means to getting those things. So even if you're pursuing wealth and thinking that by pursuing wealth, that's your happiness, and becoming rich will make you happy, what Aristotle's saying is, yeah, but it's not the money that makes you happy. It's what you can do with that money. In other words, it's what that money allows you to do. And then the doing of what the money allows you to do is actually what you consider to be happiness. Okay. Let these things be put aside, as he puts it at the end of chapter 5. I think we've covered enough for today, at least, to sort of set the table for next time. So for next time, we'll pick it up, and just full disclosure, we will skip chapter 6 of book 1 in its entirety. And so for next time, we're really just going to look at 4 chapters to varying degrees. Chapters 7, 8, 9, and 10. Okay, so this is 1097A 12, well, 1097A, let's say 14 or so, to something like 1102, yes, to 1102A4 or so. In this Joe Sachs translation, if you're using this one, yeah, it's going to be book 1, chapter 7, beginning on page 9, going to the very end of chapter 10 at the very top of page 18. That's where we'll pick up for next time, and we will wrap up our discussion of book 1 of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics next week, I suppose. So, take care. Thank you for joining me.